Hello there, BookTube. It is I, Buck, your best friend and trusted and non-treacherous vizier. And I am here to welcome you to another thrilling rendition of Buck's Books. Today we have a very exciting episode of Buck's Books. And Beefton will not be joining us because he is asleep over in the other room, and you might be able to hear him snoring depending on how good my $15 Amazon microphone is. But it's okay, because he shouldn't be here to hear any of what we're going to be saying. His little ears, he can't take it. Today, we're going to be summarizing a portion of a book. I think this is probably going to wind up being a two-parter because I got so much to say. We're going to be reviewing a portion of the book called How Women Got Their Curves and Other Just So Stories, Evolutionary Enigmas by David Philip Barash. From the top, I wanted to say that I was going to try to play this straight. I was going to try to play it as PG as I possibly could. So I went online to try to see what words I wasn't allowed to say on YouTube because I might get demonetized. Not that I'm monetized yet, but whose fault is that? So I went and I found a list, and there are 3,000 words on the list, and realistically, I'm not going to be able to avoid all of those words. I don't remember the average. I'll look it up. English vocabulary size. Let me look. Okay, so the average English vocabulary for the native English speaker is between 15,000 and 35,000 words. So mine is more. I'm not going to ape humility here because of how I just used the word ape. Like, I know a whole bunch of words, which is why I'm out here on the YouTube doing book reviews. That's just, it comes with the territory. But if I were on the lower end of a native English speaker with 15,000, yeah, math was impossible for a second there. A full fifth of my vocabulary would not be available to me, which means like that's like cutting out every fifth word. That's like cutting out fifth word. A full fifth of vocabulary would not be to me. That would be stupid. Who could live like that? I wonder if stupid is on the list. Probably. So I'm not going to make any effort to try to steer around any words that I am required to say in a discussion of evolutionary biology, except for all the cuss words that I have already been steering around. And that's not even about YouTube. That is about the big baby Jesus. Although, more than likely, the phrase big baby Jesus will get me demonetized. Into the evolutionary biology. I love evolutionary biology, dude. I cannot get enough, and it's bizarre because I started there and then wound up into like the paleo books and the paleo diet and like the Ted-pilled like green anarchists return to the shrub philosophy. But now it's a feedback loop. It feeds into one another. So the more I read about evolutionary biology, which I'm always reading at least one book about evolutionary biology, the more I just dive into this paleo revivalism, which then causes me to want to learn more about evolutionary biology, as if there are any answers in there. But realistically, there aren't, because it's all just conjecture, because you cannot... It's enough out of you. You cannot do evolutionary biology in a lab. We're just like looking at bones and being like, oh, I bet that's it. You like found a chimp. Like, look at the funny monkey. And that is the study. But we pretend we can draw conclusions from that. And I love that so much. So I have chosen this book, and it was a surprisingly good book. I banged through it pretty quick. a lot of them are very bad. A lot of them are very bad. But even the worst ones I've read, they're just like boring. And that's the risk you run because they consider themselves a science. Evolutionary biology and like evolutionary anthropology, they believe themselves to be like STEM. So you'll be confronted with just the lamest, driest academic jargon in some of the books. People who have no business writing a book and trying to spin it as pop psychology and trying to make it like cool and sexy, and then they're like, I'll bet that's a demonetized word actually. I take it back. Cool and lascivious. Yeah. But that's not one. But that's not a demonetized word. And so they put that to grab your eye in the Barnes & Noble, and then you pick it up and you're just reading like their thesis. Their bad thesis. Like their thesis that they wouldn't be able to defend. I'll bet they had to go to school twice. I'll bet they had to do their last semester over because their thesis was so bad. You know Guns, Germs, and Steel? That's kind of one of them. I mean, that's more of a... That's less evolutionary biology and more of like a history and kind of anthropology, sociology book. But that's kind of the concept that I'm getting at here. You know, because it's bad. It's a bad book, and everybody pretends it's a great book, and it's not a great book. It's a bad book. It sucks. I'm never going to review that one, but that's okay. This one was good. However, very little on the topic of the curves. They led with the curves, and the reason he led with the curves is because he wanted you to pick up the book. Because the curves, they pop. And you're like, oh, no, this'll draw the eye. And it did. I looked at it, I was like, oh, well, better find out. And so of the 6 chapters, only one was about the aforementioned curves. And that is one of the 2 that I'm going to be reviewing in here. I read them all. I just want to clarify that I'm not cheating here. I read all of the chapters. Most of them just weren't really that interesting. And the reason most of them weren't that interesting is because they don't know anything. So the book is nothing but a collection of hypotheses, and there is no way to prove these hypotheses. So you're basically just picking your favorite. And that's what evolutionary biology is. You listen to the options available to you at that time, and you're like, oh, that one sounds cool. That's the one I pick. So sort of like spirituality. So sort of like choosing a religion. You're like, yeah, that's the one that I want. I'm sticking with that one. And then you just internalize that, and it becomes part of your understanding of the world. Now, the issue, and we'll get into the issue in a second, is that many of these hypotheses are so stupid, dude. So spectacularly goofy. Okay. So, I have the Kindle here. This is a little reference. It starts out by explaining what just so stories are, and just so stories are a concept that Rudyard Kipling introduced, where he would tell these little fables, and the fables would then retroactively explain why something is the way that it is. You know, it's like a folklore thing. So the one that I remember them talking about is like the elephant, and the elephant once had like a little piggy snout, and the elephant stuck his nose in the water to get a drink, and a crocodile grabbed his nose, and he ran backwards real fast, tried to get away from it, and then the nose got stretched out, and that's why the elephant has a long nose, and that's a just so story. So he knows, like the author knows that what he's saying is all a bunch of bull honky. Like he's just making stuff up, and he's like sort of letting us know that in advance. So the title of the book is just, it's like How Women Got Their Curves, which once again makes up a total of like 15% of the book, and other just so stories. And by saying just so stories, he's saying other stuff that we're just making up for no reason because we don't have a better explanation. And that's beautiful. It's beautiful that he has that kind of insight and self-awareness, that he has dedicated himself so entirely to this field, but at the same time he's like, but it sucks, but it doesn't mean anything. I often feel the same way about psychology. So, Chapter 1 was that, just what they are. Chapter 2 is why menstruate. We don't know. We don't know why menstruate. Chapter 3, invisible ovulation. Still don't know that. That's probably because it was evolutionarily advantageous for us to try to camouflage paternity for a more expansive potential paternal investment, and ultimately a means of tying the village together so it could take a village to raise a child. So, like, forced cooperation. Coerced cooperation. But, I mean, it is our cooperation that allowed us to conquer the world, so. And then, breasts and other curves. So that's the one we're going to be talking about in this one. And he structured this book so poorly because he's just you know how I get on the camera and I just start babbling and then I try to make sense of it after the fact, so I often have to like dip back and return to a previous point, but you can tell he's just kind of slapping it together as he goes. So he wrote all, like, the chapter, and it's just one big continuous Jack Kerouac stream of consciousness. And at the end, he goes back and he's like, well, here are the hypotheses I came up with, and then he sorts them after the fact, but there's no headings. Like, they're not differentiated, they're not specified. He just kind of alludes to a thought that he had earlier. So I'm going to do the best that I can to explain the hypotheses that he poorly laid out in the course of his text wall, of his liberal meme. Okay? So, the idea here is he's looking for an evolutionary hypothesis to explain why breasts look like that. And it's a reasonable question because they look weird. And that's nothing against you ladies, because all of the boy parts look even weirder. I'm just saying, like, if you compare it to anything else going on in the animal kingdom, what? Like, we radically lost the thread there. So we're trying to figure out how come. What is there? There's got to be a reason. Nothing in nature happens without a reason, even if that reason is just, well, good enough. But the primary drives of nature are going to be natural selection and sexual selection. So one of these two had to shape why they look like that. And we're trying to figure out which it was. But there has to be a reason. You know, there has to be, it had to be advantageous at some point. That's what evolution is. Should I have started? I shouldn't have started with what evolution is, right? We're well enough versed in what evolution is. I trust you. It's like Pokemon. So the first suggestion is the buttocks mimic, right? The buttocks mimic hypothesis is the absurd belief that breasts are like a backup butt to promote ventral mating. Right? Because that is more natural for humans in some way. Now, I'm not sure who's making that natural delineation there, who's calling that particular shot, but it was suggested that, I think the suggestion that he was trying to make was that you have a better chance of conceiving dependent on specific positions, and ventral mating, which you or I may know as missionary, is more likely to result in implantation than dorsal mating, which the rest of the animal kingdom tends to prefer, including and perhaps especially dogs, which is where it got its name. So the idea behind the buttocks mimic hypothesis is that we as animals have this innate draw to butts, and that's reasonable considering the rest of the primate family. Because if you look at them, the overwhelming majority of them have, like, these swollen red situations going on when they're in heat in the buttular region, you know? And that's going to be, that's Toro, you know? That draws the attention, that signals the fertility, that lets you know game on. But humans don't have that. Humans have their what do they call it? It's like I think that he described it as clandestine ovulation or something like crypto ovulation, but we don't advertise. And there's probably a spooky evolutionary reason we don't advertise, but we don't know that because, once again, we don't know anything. And this is why my favorites sciences are evolutionary biology and neuroscience, and that's because we don't know anything about either of them. It's all hocus pocus. We're just guessing. We're guessing. It's bone shaking. It's as good as magic. It's fantastic. So the idea is that they developed as a means of sort of a frontal butt surrogate to draw the eye and encourage the ventral mating, which would increase chance of implantation. This is probably false, but very funny to me. Our next potential hypothesis is flotation devices. So, I don't know if you have ever been either fat or muscular and tried to swim. If you are muscular, swimming will not go as well as if you are fat, because if you are fat, you are buoyant. And if you are muscular, muscle is dense and heavy and less buoyant. I squat a lot, so I got pretty big legs. So when I try to float on my back, I can't. My legs, they just drop like one of those pins you used to dive for. You know, you throw them in the pool and they'd stand up, and you'd like go and dive for them. It's like that. So the idea behind the flotation device hypothesis is they're just water wingies stuck there because it connects to the aquatic ape hypothesis, which is this ridiculous ancient aliens evolutionary theory that humans were more adapted to be wading around in marshlands, and along shores, and that's where we primarily developed, like a brontosaurus, and that's why our skin is so weird. That's why we don't have the hair, because the hair didn't really serve any purpose for us, because we were already insulated by the warm waters that we were just kind of farting around by. But that, I don't know if they've actually disproven it, but I can't, if they haven't disproven it, they're not trying, because that seems like a really easy thing to disprove. So I don't go in for the flotation device hypothesis either, but maybe you do. Again, it doesn't matter. You can pick whichever one you like, because no one can tell you bupkis. No one has any idea. This is all fake. I love it. It's all fake. Just pick one. Just pick the one that you like. The next one is calorie storage, the food pantry. Straight up, you see them and you're like, wow, she has enough access to resources that she has put together quite a larder. That suggests that she has sufficient evolutionary fitness to be able to bear children. Obviously, she's doing pretty well. She's doing well enough that she can be carrying around just some extra fat, just front and center. Why not? Signaling resources, that's the next hypothesis. Signaling resources, access to the resources. See, there it is, case in point, doubling back. Calorie storage too, signaling resources, access to the resources, doing well enough that she's likely capable of fostering a successful reproduction, as compared to calorie storage 1, the food pantry, which is more straight up, where she knows where food is. So she's good. She's a serviceable mate, because it's not even the access to the resources, the signaling of the resources, but she knows how to eat and she can hold on to it. So even when the resources are not available, she's got some saved up. So even if there are no resources handy, we could probably push through at least one kid. So those are those two: calorie storage. Deception. The deception hypothesis is about promising lactation. Now, obviously, lactation is associated with maternity, with parenthood, with reproduction. The ultimate goal of evolution, of evolutionary biology, is passing on of the genes. So, if you look at a woman and see that she is actively lactating, then you know right in that moment, okay, I'm sure that's a demonetized word, come to think of it, because all these perverts But if you look and you're like, okay, 100% she is capable of maternity, you know, she is capable of maternity, which means that she would be a sound investment for passing along the possibility of more genes. You know, she's evolutionarily fit. Yeah. So why is it deception? Well, during milk production, the breasts tend to swell, right? They get bigger and they get firmer. So we're talking about how, generally speaking, women walk around with breasts that are reasonably firm and like big enough to notice all the time. So why is this deception? The deception hypothesis suggests that the reason they look like that in the first place is to indicate the possibility of lactation, to trick you, to trick the male into thinking that, or to making the association with lactation, you know? Now, the problem with this hypothesis is that they don't need to be big in order to lactate. They don't need to swell. In fact, almost every other mammal doesn't have anything in the way of like discernible breasts. Like they can just, like a whale doesn't have breasts. A whale just gets it done, you know? Like primates tend to, but not in the same way that we do. So not a very good hypothesis, but once again, who's counting? You can just pick one. You can just have it. Go on and have it. Next one is provisioning, motherhood mimics. Same concept, only carried to the next level. This one suggests that they're actively in, it's not just deception to make the association with motherhood. The provisioning is, we're already there. They are mothers, so they're capable. You know that they can do it. You know that they're pulling it off because look at those things. Obviously, they are life-giving, you know? So, but once again, this is a deceptive hypothesis. Because it doesn't necessarily mean just because they have breasts doesn't mean they're actively mothers, you know. But that's why it's one of the deception hypotheses. It's all about tricking. It's all about tricking the stupid cave man, stupid cave boy. Next up, practical provisioning. This one is very funny. The idea is that they are large and larger and look like that, so they're more like malleable. So you could more easily just get it into the baby's mouth. And that's an interesting concept, but once again, not really evolutionarily advantageous because that's not necessary in virtually any other animal. And humans aren't built that differently from any other animal. You know? Especially considering, like, the difference is only going to be like an inch or two, you know, and even then it's not of that much substance because how is a mother going to carry a nursing baby? It's always going to be the same. It's always going to be in the same spot, the same way. It's just the way the bodies are built. So why bother with the practical provisioning hypothesis? Because maybe you like it. That's fine. You can like it. Engineering. Counterweights. Are you kidding me, dude? So, I think how the counterweight hypothesis works is there's a lot of research suggesting that let me think for a second. I'm going to phrase this one without offending any delicate internet sensibilities. There's a lot of research suggesting that women who tend to store more adipose tissue below the waist, especially in the thigh and gluteal region, tend to give birth to healthier babies and more intelligent babies. But as a result, you're going to wind up potentially with an excess of weight in the posterior, like the lumbar lordosis mean, and a dearth of that same weight in the anterior, which could cause back problems because you're always pulling it's getting pulled backwards just because of the way the body is structured. And I will eventually talk about how bipedalism evolved, like in another video, because I love gabbing about this. I yap, dude. I yap. I love yapping about this in particular, but I'm not going to do it here because I'm sure I'm going to run out the clock. I'm afraid to click on the clock because sometimes I accidentally turn off the video. Oh yeah, we're already at 25. Okay, yeah, keep it pushing. Honest signaling, right? The honest signaling hypotheses are the idea that the breasts are there for a reason and they communicate some sort of evolutionary, like inarguable evolutionary signal. Like in men, that's muscularity. You cannot argue with physical muscularity. You can't fake it. Well, I mean, you can fake it now with steroids, but up until about 40 years ago, 60 years ago, you couldn't fake muscularity. You had to earn it. You had to build it, and it directly correlated with your ability to move things in real life. You know, it directly correlated with your ability to interface with the world and physically dominate your environment. There were many advantages to being strong, and that strength was demonstrable in your muscularity. So that's an honest signal of fitness. That's what they mean in evolution when they talk about honest signaling. So the idea that the breasts are honest signals here, there were a couple of different ones. One is the symmetry assessment, which is very interesting to me because obviously, as we know, neuroaesthetics, or aesthetics in general, symmetry is beautiful. We are attracted to symmetrical faces. We are attracted to symmetrical bodies. We are attracted to symmetrical shapes. That's why all of our buildings look like that. That's why our architecture looks like that. So this is also true of other human beings, especially secondary sex characteristics on the complementary human. But what's interesting about using this as an using this to explain the evolutionary development of breasts, is that they're not symmetrical. They're not. I don't know what you have seen, but in real life, they're not, and they're not supposed to be symmetrical. Unless, I mean, if you are up in arms right now, ladies, like if you insist that yours are, I don't believe you because they're all shopped, but I mean, just drop into the DMs and we'll meet up and figure this out. But the idea behind the honest signaling of the symmetry assessment is that you can't fake an honest signal, and if the ladies are symmetrical, everything is symmetrical. Genetically, you're golden. You know, you are ideal. Another honest signal is the nubility, the Goldilocks assessment. This is the suggestion, and this is one of the ones that made more sense to me, that it indicated the level of reproductive capacity in the individual as they age. You know, so if the woman does not have, if the breast had not developed yet, then obviously they are going to be too young to be reproductively viable. And if they are starting to go the way of all flesh and be influenced by gravity, and I don't mean to offend anyone, but this is likely an indicator that the woman is approaching the end of her reproductively viable years. Yeah? So the idea behind the Goldilocks nubility assessment is that if everything is perky and good, odds are that is a decent signal that the rest of the reproductive system will also be. And your chances of having a healthy baby are good. And then the other honest signaling was to other women, so that, like, they could alert their competitors that there was a new sheriff in town, that there was a new lady on the scene, and that, I don't know, that doesn't ring as true to me, but I'm very much outside looking in. Technically, I'm outside looking in all this, but, like, especially, like, female social dynamics, I'm outside looking in. So that one seems especially silly. Well, no sillier than the aquatic ape hypothesis, I suppose. But if you like it, that's fine, you can have it. All of these are available to you. The Doty daughters hypotheses are the selection. Okay. This is interesting. This is one of my favorite. These are selections for desirable daughters and selection for a handicap, right? So the idea of the selection for a handicap is like selection for a peacock, right? So a peacock, why does a peacock have a tail like that? Because of sexual selection. So what is the advantage of a peacock having a tail like that? This is interesting because it works the same way as testosterone in men. Because these are handicaps. And it's weird to think that testosterone is a handicap, but a testosterone is actually an immunosuppressant. So if a man has many indicators of high testosterone, it is an honest signal that his genes are so good that he can afford to have high testosterone, which actively makes him more prone to reckless behavior, which might just kill him anyway, and also suppresses his immune system, making him more susceptible to disease. So if you see a guy who has a lot of testosterone and he's still kicking around, that means genetically he's resistant to disease, which makes him a very viable reproductive resource for women. Peacocks work the same way. Peacocks are incredibly susceptible to predators because you can't not see them. No matter, like, if there is a peacock in the area, you will very much be aware of it. And we are not really designed to hunt and eat peacocks. So the predators, they knew even before the peacocks got there that peacocks were coming. So for a peacock to be enormous and have the outlandish plumage, how can it get away with that? Well, this is an honest indicator that it is capable of surviving even with the handicap. Things are so good, it is so reproductively fit, it is so evolutionarily sound. The individual, we're not talking about the species. This is a stupid idea for a species. But the individual is demonstrating such fitness that it doesn't matter that it looks like a Mardi Gras parade, because it has been able to survive, to escape, to outmuscle, to do whatever it is peacocks do, to get away and keep on peacocking on up until this point. So a peahen is going to see that ridiculous plumage, and the bigger the better. And they're going to be like, okay, so that's that one. That's the guy, because look at how much he's gotten away with so far. Like, the kids are going to be fine. Kids are going to be fine. And then the final hypothesis offered by this silly book is the fine-feathered females hypothesis, which is the idea of vying for paternal investment. And this ties back into the ugly little bit of evolutionary biology people don't really like to talk about, which is the possibility of the, extra partner mating. The idea that some women, that it is an evolutionarily viable strategy for some women to be attracted to a safe partner, to find a partner who is likely to participate in the rearing of the children and providing the resources, and not causing too much trouble or mischief, and not likely to wander off. And then maybe when he's not super attentive, going to find just like a dude in a leather jacket with a motorcycle, and stubble. Greater, immediately obvious physical indicators, let's go with, of evolutionary fitness. That maybe she can get a baby on real quick, and then that sap at home will raise the baby, and everybody's happy. So the idea behind the fine-feathered female hypothesis is that maybe they developed as a means of signaling sort of availability, even when they weren't trying to signal availability, to keep options open. Viable, icky, in our modern milieu, monogamous creatures as we are, but viable. So that's as much as I'm going to do now, because I've talked for way too long about this. But I had a good time, and I hope you did too. I will probably be discussing the mysterious evolutionary origins of the female orgasm in a future video, although probably not the next immediate video, because this was psychologically taxing, and I have to get through the one about what doctors really think too, because that one's going to be brief, because doctors don't seem to really think much. Thanks for tuning in. I will absolutely be doing more EvoBio. If you like this stuff, you want to stick around, like, follow, subscribe, etc. See you soon.